I still remember the moment the room went quiet. It happened at my own wedding, on a warm autumn afternoon when the sunlight touched everything with a gentle gold glow. I was standing beside the man I loved, holding his hand with a quiet joy I had not felt in years. For the first time since losing my first husband, I felt like life was offering me a second chance. And then my son, Michael, stood up. He cleared his throat, pushed his chair back, and looked straight at the man beside me. His voice was sharp, colder than I had ever heard it. "Mom," he said, "I'm just wondering, why are you marrying an old man who probably won't even be around in a few years?" His words cut through the hall like broken glass. Guests shifted in their chairs. Someone gasped. My daughter-in-law looked down at her lap, pretending to fix her bracelet. My granddaughter, little Amelia, looked confused, as if she sensed something was terribly wrong but didn't know what. And I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because if I didn't smile, I knew I would cry in front of 100 people. I kept telling myself, "Stay calm, Laura. Don't fall apart now. Not today." My new husband, Daniel, didn't say anything. He just squeezed my hand gently, the way someone does when they knows you're breaking inside. He had always been calm, always patient. And even in that moment, with my son insulting him in front of everyone, he didn't let go of my hand. I looked at Michael, my own child, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love I had in me. I remembered tying his shoes before school, packing his little lunchbox, holding him when he cried because another kid pushed him on the playground. I remembered his teenage years, his late-night talks, his dreams of becoming a police officer, and the pride in his eyes the day he graduated from the academy. But now, the man standing in front of me didn't look like the boy I raised. He looked angry. Betrayed. And I didn't understand why. When I tried to speak, he raised his hand and said, "Mom, you barely know this guy. You're letting some stranger walk into our lives. Into our family. Into Dad's place." My heart sank. Not because he spoke about his father, my late husband, John, who had passed away 8 years earlier, but because of the harshness. The resentment. The misunderstanding wrapped inside his voice. I could feel everyone's eyes on us. I wanted to sit down. I wanted the floor to open so I could hide. But instead, I steadied myself and whispered, "Michael, please. Not today." He shook his head. "Someone has to say the truth." But the truth, the real truth, was something he didn't know. Something none of them knew. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not even most of the guests in the room. And in just a few minutes, that truth would reveal itself in a way that would leave the entire room silent, and my son speechless. Because the old man he mocked was not just anyone. His real identity was something that would change my family forever. My name is Laura Bennett, and I live in a small, quiet town in Ohio. For more than 30 years, this town held every part of my life, my marriage, my children's childhoods, my happiest moments, and some of my most painful ones. The streets were familiar, the homes were warm, and the people knew each other by name. It was the sort of place where neighbors waved from their porches and children played in the street until sunset. My first husband, John Bennett, and I built our life here. He was a kind man, gentle but strong in the ways that mattered. He worked as a firefighter, and I stayed home for several years to raise our 2 children, Michael and Emily. Those early years felt like a dream, busy, joyful, tiring, but full of meaning. Every day had little moments that made me smile: breakfast cereal spilled on the table, tiny shoes left in the hallway, the sound of giggles from the backyard as the kids played. I didn't know then how fast those moments would pass. Michael was my firstborn. From the time he was a toddler, he wanted to be a hero. He ran around the house wearing a plastic badge, telling me he would protect everyone. Emily was younger by 5 years, and she was softer, quieter, the kind of child who liked sitting close and listening to stories. My two children were so different, yet they were pieces of my heart in equal measure. John took pride in being a father. He had a calm presence, a steady voice, and a warm laugh that filled our home. But life has ways of shifting, sometimes softly, sometimes like a storm. And ours changed the day he got sick. It started small, a cough that wouldn't go away, a tiredness he couldn't explain. The diagnosis came quickly after that. Stage 4 lung cancer. I can still remember the moment the doctor said the words. It felt like the air in the room disappeared. I looked at John's face, and he looked at mine, and I saw that familiar strength, but I also saw fear. The next months were heavy. Every day felt like walking uphill with a weight on my chest. I tried to be strong for our children, who were old enough to understand but still too young to carry the kind of grief that was coming. Michael was already out of high school, studying at the police academy, and Emily was just starting her second year of college. When John passed, our world split open. The home that once felt full now echoed. The air felt cold. The nights felt endless. Michael cried quietly at the funeral. Emily cried openly. And I stood between them, holding both their hands, wondering how I was supposed to move forward when the man I had loved since I was 19 was gone. For years after, I lived in stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't heal you but simply keeps you from falling apart. I went to work, made simple dinners, kept the house clean, and visited my children when I could. Michael married a woman named Samantha, who was gentle and polite, though a little distant with me at times. They had a daughter, Amelia, who became the light of my older years. Emily moved to Chicago for work, always calling, always checking in, always making sure I wasn't drowning in loneliness. But I was. I didn't tell them. I didn't want to add weight to their lives. They both had their own families, their own paths, their own challenges. I told myself I was fine. I told myself that my life was full enough. Until the day I met Daniel Carter. Meeting Daniel. It happened in the most ordinary place, the grocery store. I was trying to reach a box of tea from the top shelf, stretching as high as I could. A voice behind me said gently, "Would you like some help with that?" I turned and saw a man with kind eyes and silver hair. He wore a navy jacket, neat but simple. He didn't look rushed or impatient, just quietly willing to help. I nodded with a small smile, and he reached up and handed me the tea as if it was the most natural thing. "Thank you," I said softly. "Of course," he replied. "Tea is important business." I laughed, a small, surprised laugh I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. And he smiled as if hearing it made his day. We talked for a moment, nothing deep, nothing personal. Later, I saw him again in the parking lot, placing his groceries into his car. He waved politely, and I waved back. I didn't think much of it. But a week later, I saw him again at the same store. And again the week after that. Eventually, we exchanged names. He was Daniel Carter, retired, widowed for almost 12 years. He lived a few miles away in a small house surrounded by maple trees. He liked reading history books, cooking simple meals, and taking long evening walks. There was something gentle about him. Something steady. Something I didn't know I was missing until I felt it again. Our conversations became longer. Then we met for coffee. Then dinner. And slowly, carefully, I let myself enjoy his company. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't moving through life alone. When I told my children about him, Emily smiled and said, "Mom, that's wonderful." But Michael went quiet. He didn't say much at first. Later, though, the questions started. Who is he? What does he want? Are you sure he's not after something? Why now, after all these years? I tried to reassure him, but I could feel a wall growing between us. A wall I didn't understand, and one he refused to explain. I thought time would soften him. I thought meeting Daniel would ease his worries. I was wrong. What happened next, the slow shift, the tension, the doubts, would lead us straight to the painful moment at my wedding when my son insulted the man who would soon shock everyone with his true identity. And none of us were prepared for what that truth would be. As the months passed, Daniel and I found a rhythm that felt natural. We took slow walks in the evenings, sometimes without talking, just listening to the sound of leaves brushing against the wind. He liked holding my hand, but always gently, as if he didn't want me to feel pressured or rushed. That was something I admired about him, his patience. He never pushed, never assumed, never stepped into my life with force. He simply stood beside me, waiting for me to let him in at my own pace. I spent many dinners at his home. His cooking was simple but warm: roasted vegetables, baked chicken, small bowls of soup that he made from scratch. He always set the table neatly, placing a folded cloth napkin by my plate. It was a quiet gesture, but it made me feel cared for in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. He asked about my life often. Not in a nosy way, but with a genuine curiosity. He wanted to know about John, about my children, about the job I had at the local clinic, about the books I liked to read when the house felt lonely. When I spoke about my late husband, he listened with respect. Not once did he act threatened or insecure. He simply nodded, as if honoring that piece of my heart while creating space for himself in a different corner of it. One evening, while we were walking by the lake, he said softly, "You don't have to hide your past from me, Laura. I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm just here." Those words stayed with me. I'm just here. Simple. True. Uncomplicated. And without realizing it, I began to look forward to the moments we shared. The steady company. The warm dinners. The slow, thoughtful conversations. My home felt less empty. My mornings felt lighter. My nights didn't ache the way they used to. But on the other side of all this quiet happiness, there was a growing tension in my relationship with Michael. He visited me less often, and when he did, his questions were sharp and quick. "How well do you even know this guy? What does he do for a living? Why is he alone? Doesn't he have a family of his own? What if he's hiding something?" I tried to explain that Daniel was retired, that he had worked in private consulting for years, that he was widowed and didn't have children. But the more I explained, the more suspicious Michael seemed to become. There were evenings when I sat alone at my kitchen table after Michael left, wondering why he was so resistant. Wondering what I had done wrong. Wondering how loving again could cause this much tension. Emily, bless her gentle heart, felt the shift too. On a phone call one night, she said, "Mom, maybe he just misses Dad. Maybe this is his way of holding on." I thought about that, and it made sense. Michael had always been close to his father. They shared the same sense of duty, the same seriousness, the same quiet pride. Losing John was hard for all of us, but for Michael, it had carved a deeper wound than he had ever admitted. I tried to give him space. But space only seemed to create more distance. Still, life continued. And one evening, as the sunset painted the sky with soft colors, Daniel held my hand and said, "Laura, I care about you more than I expected to. And I want to build something with you, if you want that too." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't expected those words. I had been afraid of thinking too far ahead. But his voice was steady, warm, patient, the way it always was. I nodded. I want that too. It wasn't a grand moment. There were no fireworks, no music, no big speeches. Just two people standing by the lake, deciding to move forward together with hope. A few months later, he asked me to marry him. It wasn't in an expensive restaurant. It wasn't during a big trip. It happened on his back porch, with the sound of trees rustling in the wind and a simple candle glowing on the table. He held my hand and said, "Laura Bennett, you have made these last 2 years feel like a second life. Will you share the rest of it with me?" Tears filled my eyes. I whispered yes. He smiled softly and kissed my forehead. "Then we'll walk forward, together." Telling the family. Telling Emily was easy. She cried happy tears and hugged me so tight I almost lost my breath. She kept saying, "Mom, you deserve this. You deserve love again." But telling Michael. That was different. He came over one Saturday morning, tired from a long night shift at the police department. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee while I cooked breakfast. I didn't want to surprise him. I wanted to be gentle, honest, clear. "Michael," I said softly, "Daniel asked me to marry him." He froze. His jaw tightened. "And what did you say?" I said yes. He set his mug down harder than he meant to. "Why? Why would you do that?" "Because I love him," I replied in a calm voice. He shook his head. "Mom, he's a stranger. You've known him what, 2 years? That's nothing." "It's enough for me," I said quietly. "That's because you don't know who he really is." There it was, the fear I had sensed but couldn't name. The anger that had been sitting inside him. I reached for his hand, but he pulled back slightly. "Michael, please try to understand. This doesn't take anything away from your father. I will always love him. But I can love again too." He didn't answer. His silence said everything. When he left that day, he didn't hug me. He didn't even look back as he walked toward his car. I stood at the window long after he drove away, watching the empty road, feeling a pain I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the hurt of his disapproval. It was the fear that loving someone new might cost me my son. And yet, life does not wait for our fears to settle. The wedding plans began. Slowly, quietly, beautifully. And none of us knew that everything, every doubt, every question, every misunderstanding, would come crashing together on the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life. The day my son insulted my new husband. The day the room fell silent. The day Daniel's true identity was revealed. The months leading toward the wedding should have been peaceful. They should have carried warmth, excitement, and gentle anticipation. Instead, they became a quiet storm, a storm that only grew stronger the closer the wedding day came. At first, the signs were small. Subtle. Easy to ignore, though they rested at the back of my mind like a tiny ache that never fully went away. Michael stopped calling as often. When I texted him, he replied with short, clipped messages. Sometimes he didn't reply at all. When I invited him and Samantha to dinner, he said he was too tired from work. When I offered to bring food to their house, Samantha politely declined, saying they were busy. I kept telling myself it was temporary. He was stressed. His work schedule was heavy. He needed time. But deep down, in that quiet part of a mother's heart that knows more than spoken words, I felt the distance growing. Still, I held on to hope. I believed, or maybe wanted to believe, that once he saw how kind Daniel was, once he understood that this marriage was not replacing anyone, things would soften. So I invited them again. And again. One evening, after several attempts, Michael finally agreed to come over with his family. I spent the entire afternoon cooking. I made his favorite, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with lemon. I cleaned the house twice. I set the table with the good dishes, the ones John and I had bought the year we got married. When the doorbell rang, my heart lifted. But when I opened the door, the look on Michael's face told me everything. He wasn't angry exactly. Anger has fire, heat, emotion. This was something else. A coldness. A wall. Samantha beside him gave me a small smile, the kind people give at funerals. Amelia, sweet little Amelia, ran into my arms, and I held her close, letting her warmth steady my heart. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, bringing a small dessert he baked himself, a soft lemon cake dusted with powdered sugar. He always tried to make these gatherings easier. He always walked into tension with gentleness, hoping to soften whatever pain lived beneath it. Throughout dinner, the conversation stumbled. Daniel asked how Michael's work was. Michael shrugged. Busy. Daniel asked Amelia about school. She answered happily, her innocence untouched by the tension around her. But the silence between my son and my fiancé grew heavier with every passing minute. Finally, when dessert was served, Michael leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "So, Daniel, are you planning to retire again?" Daniel paused, confused. Retire again? Michael raised an eyebrow. You said you were retired, right? But retired from what, exactly? The question seemed harmless, but the tone wasn't. I watched Daniel smile gently. I did private consulting for many years. Mostly governmental. Consulting, Michael repeated, the word flat, empty. That can mean a lot of things. Yes, Daniel answered calmly. It can. And you don't have any family? No children? No siblings? No close relatives? Daniel's expression softened, the way it did whenever he spoke of his past. My wife passed a long time ago. We never had children. And my parents are both gone. I have a cousin in Boston, but we're not close. Michael nodded slowly, but the doubt in his eyes didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. I looked at him gently. Michael, is something bothering you? He didn't answer at first. He stared at his plate as if the truth lived there. Then he looked up and said, People don't just show up out of nowhere, Mom. Out of nowhere. I repeated softly. I mean it, he said. One day, you're alone. The next day, you have a man wanting to marry you. Michael. My voice trembled. Daniel didn't just show up. We met. We spent time together. I've known him for almost 2 years. He leaned forward. Do you know his background? His records? His history? I felt my chest tighten. He's not a criminal. That's not what I said, he whispered. But the implication was there. And Daniel heard it. Instead of reacting with anger or even hurt, Daniel placed his hands gently around his coffee mug. Michael, he said softly, I understand your concern. You love your mother. You want her safe. Michael's jaw tightened. He didn't accept the kindness in those words. I get it, Daniel continued. If my daughter were getting married. But you don't have a daughter, Michael cut in quickly. You don't have anyone. That's what I'm trying to understand. Samantha placed a hand on his arm. Michael, maybe. But he shook her off lightly. I sat there, unable to speak. I looked at my son and saw the worry buried beneath his anger. I saw the fear. I saw the grief he never dealt with, the grief he carried from losing his father. To him, this marriage felt like betrayal. Not just of his father's memory, but of the family he thought we were supposed to remain forever, unchanged, untouched by time. That night, after they left, I sat on the couch with Daniel beside me. I felt tired, older than my years, weary in a way I couldn't explain. I'm sorry, I whispered. Daniel shook his head. You don't have anything to be sorry for. He's hurting, I said softly. But he doesn't know how to say it. Daniel reached for my hand. Then we will give him time. People say things when they're scared. Fear speaks louder than love sometimes. I leaned my head on his shoulder. I just want peace. And you'll have it, he said in a warm voice. Even storms pass. But the storm was only beginning. Cloud with rain whispers, doubts, and a silent distance. A few weeks later, I overheard part of a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I had gone to drop off some baked goods at Michael's house. Samantha let me in while she finished folding laundry upstairs. Amelia was coloring in the living room. I was heading toward the kitchen when I heard Michael on the phone. I just don't trust him. Something's off. No one has that clean of a record. No social media. No real online presence. It's strange. I froze. He continued. I'm not saying he's dangerous. I'm saying he's hiding something. People don't just disappear for 40 years and then reappear as retirees. I stood there, holding a small container of blueberry muffins, feeling as if someone had pulled the floor out from beneath me. My son wasn't just uncomfortable with my marriage. He was investigating the man I loved. He was digging into his life. Looking for secrets. Looking for reasons not to trust him. I left without saying goodbye. Later that evening, I told Daniel what I heard. He sat down quietly, folding his hands. I see. That's it? I asked softly. That's it, he answered. Your son is a police officer, Laura. It is in his nature to investigate. But he shouldn't be investigating you. If it brings him peace, Daniel whispered, then let him look. I stared at him, trying to understand this calmness. Does it bother you? It hurts, he admitted gently. But it doesn't anger me. Michael loves you. That love just comes out sideways sometimes. I placed my hand on his. Why didn't you tell him more about your past? Because, Daniel said after a pause, my past is complicated. And it is not something people accept easily. A small chill traveled up my spine. Complicated how? He smiled softly, sadly. I will tell you everything. But not like this. Not while you're worried. When the time is right, you'll know. I promise. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to peel back the layers he kept so carefully hidden. But I trusted him. More deeply than I expected to. So I nodded and let it rest. The engagement party that didn't feel like one. Emily arranged a small engagement party for us, just close friends, a few neighbors, some co-workers from the clinic. The evening was lovely, warm, filled with laughter and soft music. Michael did not come. He said he had work, but Emily later pulled me aside and whispered, "Mom, he wasn't working tonight." I smiled sadly. Maybe another time. But another time never came. As the wedding approached, the distance grew. Every phone call felt heavy. Every conversation felt tense. Every moment reminded me that mothers can love their children completely and still feel heartbreak because of them. The week before the wedding, Michael showed up unannounced. He stood at my door with a look that made my heart ache. "Mom," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside to let him in. He didn't sit. He paced. His hands were restless, his jaw tight. Then he turned to me and said in a voice that felt like a blade, "I think you're making the biggest mistake of your life." My heart cracked. "Michael." "Mom, I mean it. You don't know who this man is." "You're wrong," I said softly. "Then tell me. Tell me his history. Tell me where he worked. Tell me why no one knows him." "I don't owe you every detail of his life," I replied calmly. "Yes," he snapped, "you do, if you're inviting him into our family." I felt my hands tremble. "Michael, you are my son. But my marriage is my choice." He looked at me with hurt in his eyes, hurt that almost broke me in half. "You're choosing him over us," he whispered. "No," I said firmly. "I'm choosing love. I'm choosing companionship. I'm choosing to live again." He shook his head slowly. "You'll regret this, Mom." And then he left. No hug. No goodbye. Just silence and footsteps fading down the driveway. I cried that night. Quietly, so no one would hear. Not because I doubted my choice, but because I feared losing my son to a misunderstanding he refused to let go of. Cloud with rain tension reaches the wedding day. When the wedding day arrived, I held on to hope the way drowning people hold on to driftwood. The venue was simple, a small garden with white chairs and soft pink flowers. The air smelled like early autumn, crisp and sweet. Emily helped me get dressed. Samantha arrived with Amelia, offering help but with a heaviness in her eyes. Michael stood stiffly near the entrance, avoiding Daniel completely. Guests filled their seats. Music began. I walked down the aisle toward the man who had given me laughter again after years of loneliness. And for a moment, just a moment, everything felt right. Until the reception. Until the toast. Until the moment my son stood up and shattered the air with words sharp enough to cut the whole room open. "Why," he said loudly, clearly, "is my mother marrying an old man who won't even be around in a few years?" The hall went silent. The shock spread like a wave. And that was the moment where all the rising tension, all the whispers, the doubts, the grief, finally broke open. None of us knew it yet. But his cruel words would open the door to a truth that would shake every person in that room. A truth about Daniel. A truth Michael never expected. A truth that would change everything. The moment after Michael's insult felt like a void, a long, empty pause where time stretched thin and fragile. The air in the room became heavy, almost too heavy to breathe. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down at their plates, others stared at their hands as if they wished they could disappear into the folds of the tablecloth. I didn't speak. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had too much inside me: shock, sadness, disappointment, and a deep, motherly ache. My son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love in my heart, was standing in front of everyone with anger in his eyes and pain in his voice. And beside me, Daniel did not flinch. He simply stood there, holding my hand with a steadiness that both comforted and broke me. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't angry. He didn't try to defend himself or react with pride. He absorbed the moment like someone who had lived through worse storms and learned how to stay calm through them. He whispered softly, "It's all right, Laura." But it wasn't all right. Nothing about it was all right. My voice trembled as I looked toward my son. "Michael, why?" He didn't answer immediately. His chest rose and fell quickly, his hands trembling slightly as if holding back words that were sharper than the ones he had already spoken. Then, in a strained voice, he said, "Because someone has to tell the truth." The murmur in the room grew louder. People exchanged glances, confused, tense, uneasy. Emily stood up from her seat. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Michael, sit down. This isn't the time." But he ignored her. Instead, he took a step closer to us, pointing at Daniel with a trembling hand. "Mom, do you even know who this man is? Do you know anything about him? Anything real?" "I know enough," I said quietly. "No," he shot back. "You know what he told you." But I looked. I searched. "And you know what I found." His words made my stomach twist. Here it was, the investigation he had kept hidden from me. Michael continued, "Nothing. No public records. No job history the last 15 years. No relatives. No social media. No digital footprint at all. People do not just not exist. Daniel remained silent. And that silence seemed to fuel Michael further. Mom, you're trusting a man with no past. Doesn't that scare you? No, I said softly, even though my heart trembled. Because I trust who he is now. Michael's laugh was short, painful. You're marrying a stranger. Daniel took a slow breath, then stepped forward, not defensively, but with the calmness of someone accepting a responsibility he had carried for years. Michael, he said gently, your concerns are not wrong. You are a protector. I respect that. Don't patronize me, Michael snapped. I'm not, Daniel replied softly. You're doing what you were trained to do. What your heart tells you to do. Protect your family. Hearing Daniel speak with such kindness only seemed to frustrate Michael more. I found things, he said suddenly, voice cracking. Things that don't add up. I felt my breath catch. What things? I asked. He swallowed hard. His eyes shone with a mixture of fear and desperation. A private consultant with ties to federal agencies. A man who traveled more than he stayed home. A man with sealed records. You know what sealed records mean, Mom? Before I could speak, Daniel's voice cut through the tension. Yes, he said simply. It means I had a life you were never meant to read about. Michael turned toward him sharply. So you admit it. You've been hiding who you are. I never hid who I am, Daniel answered gently. I simply didn't lead with the parts of my past that no longer define me. Michael took a step closer. Then tell us. Tell all of us. Who are you? The room fell silent. Every eye shifted toward Daniel. I felt his hand tighten around mine. He looked at me first, not at my son, not at the guests, not at the room. Just at me. His eyes carried gentleness and apology, strength and sadness. As if he had been waiting for this moment, fearing it, expecting it. Then he spoke. My name is Daniel Carter. But that is only part of my name. A quiet gasp rippled through the guests. For over 30 years, I worked in the federal intelligence system, he continued. Mostly undercover, mostly overseas. I watched people who needed watching. I protected people who needed protecting. And sometimes, he paused, sometimes I disappeared when needed. Michael's face drained of color. I retired 12 years ago, Daniel said calmly. But some of my records remain sealed by the government. Not because I am dangerous. But because my work was. Another whisper of shock spread through the room. I felt my knees weaken. Michael blinked several times, struggling to find words. You're, what? CIA? FBI? Daniel didn't blink. I was embedded in national intelligence programs. Not always under one agency. Michael stared, stunned. Samantha placed a hand over her mouth. Emily sat down slowly, her eyes wide. My heart thudded against my chest. How had I not known? How had I not guessed? The calmness, the measured voice, the disciplined way he carried himself. It all made sense suddenly, painfully, beautifully. But Michael didn't see beauty. He saw threat. So you could be lying about everything, Michael said, voice trembling. I could, Daniel admitted. But I'm not. Prove it. Daniel shook his head softly. I cannot show you classified documents, Michael. They are sealed for a reason. Convenient, Michael snapped. No, Daniel said quietly. Painful. The room grew still again. Michael was breathing heavily now. So what? My mother is supposed to trust some former spy with secrets. Some man who could have been anywhere, done anything. Why didn't you tell her? Daniel's answer came with a softness that stunned me. Because I wanted one part of my life to be simple, Michael. One part without ghosts. One part not defined by things I cannot talk about. I wanted to love her as a man, not as a shadow of my past. My heart broke open. Those words, quiet, raw, honest, wrapped around me like a warmth I wasn't ready for. But Michael was not ready to hear them. People with sealed records always say that, he muttered. Then he turned to me. Mom, you didn't know any of this. I swallowed hard. No. Not all of it. And that doesn't scare you? He asked. I looked at Daniel, then back at my son. What scares me is losing my family over fear. Michael's voice cracked. I lost Dad. I'm not losing you too. I stepped closer to him. Marrying again does not mean losing me. Yes, it does, he cried, his voice breaking. Because it feels like you're leaving Dad behind. And if you leave him behind, then what happens to us? To our family? My heart ached with a pain no mother wants to feel. Michael took a shaky breath. Dad was everything. And now you're choosing a stranger with secrets. Daniel stepped back respectfully, giving us space. I reached toward Michael, but he stepped away. Then, in a voice full of desperation and fear, he asked. Mom, do you really know this man? Daniel answered before I could. No. Not all of me. And she never will. Because no one is supposed to. Michael's jaw tightened. Exactly. And that's the problem. Daniel took a slow breath. No, Michael. The problem is that you believe being unable to share my past makes me unworthy of your mother's future. The room fell silent again. Daniel continued, I have done things in service of this country that I cannot put into words. I have lived in places no one in this room would ever visit. I have watched people lie, betray, hurt, and destroy each other. And I left that world because it nearly destroyed me. He turned to me with a softness so deep it hurt. When I met your mother, she was a quiet light in a life that had too much darkness. She didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. She didn't judge me for the things I couldn't say. She just let me be human again. My eyes filled with tears. He faced Michael again. I am not a danger to her. I am not hiding a crime. I am hiding pain. And I hoped I wouldn't have to unpack it on her wedding day. Michael swallowed hard. His anger softened just a little, replaced by confusion, fear, and something like guilt. So all this time, he whispered, you were, what? Protecting the country. Daniel nodded. Trying to. And now you want to be, what? A husband. Daniel's answer was simple. A man worthy of her. I covered my mouth as tears streamed down my cheeks. But Michael wasn't done. His voice cracked. You should have told us. You are right, Daniel said gently. I should have found a way. I was wrong to think I could outrun my past forever. But secrecy is a habit in my world, one that is hard to unlearn. Then the hardest moment came. Michael looked at me, really looked at me, with eyes full of conflict. Mom, can you honestly say you're okay with this? I took Daniel's hand. I felt its steadiness. Its warmth. Its truth. Yes, I whispered. Because he has never lied to me where it matters. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. Michael's breath shook. His shoulders trembled. He looked lost, a grown man, a police officer, a protector, suddenly feeling like a little boy who didn't know how to keep his family together. He whispered, I don't want to lose you. I cupped his face softly. You will never lose me. But he stepped back. And the space between us felt impossibly wide. The turning point had come. The truth had been revealed. Nothing could go back to the way it was. Not for me. Not for Michael. Not for Daniel. And the next words Michael spoke would shift the path of our family forever. After Daniel revealed the truth about his past, the entire room felt different, still tense, still heavy, but now filled with a stunned quietness instead of sharp judgment. People didn't know where to look or what to say. Some stared at their plates, some at the floor, and some at me, waiting to see how I would respond to everything unfolding. Michael stood completely still, as if frozen between the man he was and the boy he used to be. His face shifted through emotions so quickly, anger, confusion, hurt, disbelief, that it was hard to know which one truly lived inside him at that moment. Finally, he whispered, "Mom, did you really know nothing?" It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was fear. Raw and unhidden. I took a slow breath. I knew pieces, I admitted softly. I knew he had a difficult past. I knew he worked for the government at one point. I knew there were things he couldn't share yet. But I also knew his heart, Michael. I knew his kindness. His patience. His love. Michael closed his eyes tightly, as if holding back words he couldn't say out loud. Daniel stepped forward slightly, not threateningly, not imposing, but gently. Always gently. "Michael," he said, "your mother deserves safety, truth, and peace. And I can promise you that I would never harm her. Not in any way. The things I can't say are about the past. Not the future." But Michael shook his head. "It's not only about safety. It's about trust." Daniel nodded. "And you are right to expect trust. I only ask for time to earn it." Michael turned away, running his hand through his hair. His breathing was uneven, as if holding the weight of grief he had ignored for too long. Across the room, Samantha wiped her eyes quietly. Emily looked torn between wanting to comfort me and wanting to protect her brother. Even the guests who barely knew us looked emotional, touched by the honesty in the air. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't a happy moment. But it was a real moment. And sometimes, real moments are the ones that break the walls we build around ourselves. A mother's pain, a son's fear. I took a few slow steps toward Michael. My heels clicked softly against the floor. The sound echoed in the silent room, reminding me how fragile everything felt. "Michael," I whispered, "look at me." He did, slowly, reluctantly. I placed my hand on his cheek, the same way I did when he was a little boy and scraped his knee. "I know you're scared." His voice cracked. "I'm not." "Yes," I said softly, "you are. And it's all right to be." His voice broke completely. "I lost Dad once. I can't lose you too." Oh, how that pain pierced through me. "You won't," I whispered. "I am still your mother. And I always will be. But if you ask me to choose between loving you and giving up my chance at companionship, at peace, at a new beginning, I cannot choose against my own heart." Tears streamed down his face now, and he didn't wipe them away. "It feels like you're leaving us behind," he admitted. I shook my head gently. "No. I am walking forward, Michael. But I look back for you every day. I wait for you. I pray for you. I love you. Nothing in this life, nothing, can change that." Daniel remained respectfully quiet behind me, giving us the space we needed. "Dad is gone," Michael whispered, voice shaking. "And I feel like if you move on, it means he really won't come back." And there it was, the truth he never said until now. I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him close. "Oh, sweetheart. Moving forward isn't forgetting. Love doesn't disappear just because life continues. I will always love your father. Always. But I have space in my heart for more than one chapter." Michael's hands slowly came up to hold my arms, not tightly, but just enough to let me know he wasn't pulling away anymore. He rested his forehead against mine. I don't know how to accept this. You don't have to figure it out today, I said softly. Just don't shut the door forever. He nodded slowly, silently. And that was enough. Sun behind small cloud. Daniel steps in. Daniel finally approached us, not quickly, not boldly, but with the gentle presence that defined everything about him. Michael, he said, I am not here to replace your father. I could never do that. I'm here because your mother deserves joy in the years she has left. She deserves laughter, companionship, love. She deserves someone who wakes up grateful to share life with her. Michael looked at him, eyes still wet. Why didn't you just tell us? Daniel took a long, deep breath. Because when you live a life of secrecy, you forget how to be open. Everything becomes locked. Protected. Hidden. I'm still learning how to let people in. Michael looked at him for a long time, really looked. Then he asked softly, Are you dangerous? It was a question spoken by a son, not a police officer. Daniel shook his head gently. I was dangerous for a living. But not anymore. Now I am just a man who wants peace. And a chance to love your mother fully. Michael swallowed hard. And slowly, very slowly, took a step back, not out of rejection, but out of a need for space to breathe. A new kind of wedding day. The officiant approached hesitantly. Would you still like to continue the ceremony? I looked at Daniel. He looked at me. I nodded softly. Daniel smiled, small, warm, reassuring. The guests settled quietly, the air still thick with emotion but no longer suffocating. Instead, it felt like the aftermath of a storm, the kind where the sky is still gray but the wind finally calms. Michael didn't leave. He didn't sit, either. He stood at the back of the room, hands clasped, eyes lowered. But he stayed. For me, that was everything. The officiant began. The words were gentle. Simple. Kind. As Daniel and I exchanged vows, I glanced at Michael from time to time. He wasn't smiling. But he wasn't angry anymore. He was thinking. Processing. Healing, maybe. When Daniel placed the ring on my finger, he whispered so only I could hear, Thank you for trusting me. Tears filled my eyes. Thank you for loving me. When I placed the ring on his finger, I felt his hands tremble slightly, a reminder that even strong men have soft places in their hearts. We kissed softly, tenderly. The room applauded, not loudly, but with warmth, with understanding, with relief. For the first time that day, I let myself breathe fully. After the ceremony. Later, during the reception, Samantha approached me first. She held my hands gently. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have helped more. I should have encouraged Michael to talk instead of letting him hold it all in. I hugged her. It's all right. Today was hard for all of us. He loves you, she said. He's just afraid. I know. Emily hugged me next, her eyes shining with happy tears. Mom, you're married. I am, I whispered. And Daniel, he handled everything with so much grace. Yes, I said softly. He always does. Even some of the guests who barely knew us came up to offer gentle words, touched by what they had witnessed. But the moment I waited for came later. When the room had calmed, when the music played softly, when most of the guests were occupied with cake or conversation, Michael walked toward us. Daniel straightened slightly, not with fear, but with respect. Michael stopped in front of him. There was a long silence. Then he held out his hand. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Daniel didn't hesitate. He shook Michael's hand with both of his, pulling him into a gentle, warm gesture. You protected your family, Daniel said softly. Never apologize for that. Michael's eyes filled again, but this time with humility, not anger. He turned to me and hugged me tightly. I love you, Mom. I held him close. I love you too. It wasn't perfect reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The first step toward healing what had been broken between us. Crescent moon, a quiet moment after the storm. That night, after everyone had gone home and Daniel and I finally sat on the edge of the bed in our small honeymoon suite, I let out a long, shaky breath. What a day, I whispered. Daniel chuckled softly. Not the wedding either of us planned. No, I said, smiling gently. But maybe the one we needed. He took my hand and kissed it lightly. I meant what I said today. Your son is strong. Protective. Good-hearted. His pain comes from love, not hate. I rested my head on his shoulder. He'll need time. And I'll give him as much as he needs. I looked up at him. You were so patient today. So calm. He smiled sadly. I spent my whole life in situations where panic only made things worse. Love teaches the same lesson. I leaned into him, finally letting the weight of the day melt from my body. Thank you, I whispered. For what? He asked. For choosing me, I said softly. For coming out of the shadows. For walking into the light with me. Daniel closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against mine. You saved me from a life of loneliness, he whispered. You gave me a home. We sat there quietly, feeling the softness of the night, the comfort of each other's presence. And somewhere in that stillness, I realized something important. Today wasn't just the story of a son's fear or a man's hidden past. It was the story of how love, real, quiet, patient love, can hold its ground even in the middle of storms. Our family wasn't whole yet. Not completely. But love had begun stitching the cracks back together. And tomorrow, we would keep healing. Together. The days after the wedding felt strangely peaceful, almost like the world had softened its edges. The sky seemed a little bluer, the mornings a little brighter, and even the quiet moments in the house felt less heavy. Maybe it was because the truth had finally been spoken. Maybe it was because the pain that had been building for months had finally found its way out into the open. Whatever the reason, I felt myself breathing easier for the first time in a long while. Michael didn't avoid us after the wedding. He wasn't warm yet, not fully, but he was present in a way he hadn't been before. He would call every few days, asking how I was doing, checking in on small things, telling me stories about work. His voice still carried hesitation sometimes, but underneath it, I heard something new: effort. Trying. Reaching. Healing. And that meant everything to me. One afternoon, about a week after the wedding, he stopped by unannounced. I opened the door and found him holding a small bag of pastries from my favorite bakery. I thought you might like these, he said, almost shyly. I smiled. I always do. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where so many painful conversations had happened in the past months. This time, though, there was warmth between us. Not perfect, not fully restored, but warm enough. After a few minutes of small talk, he finally asked, "Is Daniel home?" "He's in the backyard," I said softly. "Reading." Michael nodded, hesitated, then said, "Can I talk to him?" My heart tightened, not with fear, but with hope. A quiet, cautious hope that felt too delicate to touch. I led him to the back door. He paused before stepping out, took a slow breath, then walked toward Daniel, who was sitting under the maple tree with a book in his lap. Daniel looked up and smiled gently. "Hello, Michael." Michael stood still for a long moment, then pulled out the chair beside him. "I don't know much about what you did for a living," he began, his voice level but soft. Daniel nodded. You're not supposed to. I know, Michael said. But I was thinking, maybe I judged you too fast. Daniel closed his book. It's all right. You were afraid for your mother. It came from love. Michael took another slow breath. I want to understand you. I might never understand everything, but I want to try. Daniel's eyes softened, and he nodded. Then I will tell you what I can. Anything that's mine to share, I'll share. I watched from the kitchen doorway as the two men talked, my son and my husband. Their voices were quiet, steady, sometimes heavy, sometimes even light. They were building something fragile but real. A bridge. And for the first time in months, I let myself believe that my family would find its way back to itself. Crescent moon, a new beginning. Later that evening, after Michael left, Daniel and I sat together on the porch swing. The sky had turned a soft lavender, the kind of color that makes you feel safe without knowing why. The crickets hummed in the grass, and the air carried a gentle chill that brushed against our skin. You were wonderful today, I told him. He shook his head. No. Your son was brave. He came with honesty. He came because he wants to heal. Daniel looked at me with a tenderness that still surprised me sometimes. Then we will heal with him. One step at a time. I leaned against his shoulder. Do you ever regret telling him the truth? He thought for a moment, then said, no. Secrets protect missions. But they break families. I can't live like that anymore. His words settled deep into my heart. For so many years, he had lived in a world where silence was survival. Where truth was a luxury. Where trust could cost a life. To watch him step out of that world and into mine, with vulnerability, with honesty, with hope, felt like a gift I didn't know how to deserve. I placed my hand over his. Thank you for choosing to be open. He kissed my forehead gently. Thank you for giving me a life worth opening up to. A soft lesson life taught me. In the weeks that followed, things slowly returned to a new kind of normal. I cooked dinners for Daniel. He helped me in the garden. Emily visited often. Samantha brought Amelia, who loved sitting on Daniel's lap while he read to her from his old history books. And Michael. He kept trying. Some days he called. Some days he stopped by. Some days he simply sent a message saying, "Hope you're doing okay." And each one of those small gestures felt like a stitch repairing the torn fabric of our family. I learned something important through all of this, something I wish I had understood sooner. People don't resist change because they hate it. They resist it because they fear losing the things they love. Michael wasn't angry about my remarriage. He was afraid. Afraid of losing his mother. Afraid of losing his father's memory. Afraid of losing the family he used to know. But love, real love, doesn't replace what came before. It adds to it. It expands the heart rather than crowding it. On a quiet evening months later, I sat alone in the living room with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything that had happened. The wedding. The confrontation. The truth. The healing. And I whispered to myself. Life gives us many chapters. But they are meant to be read in order, not revisited over and over. My first chapter with John will always be part of me. A beautiful, irreplaceable part. But that story ended. And a new one began, with Daniel, with understanding, with unexpected truth, with difficult healing. And I realized something else. Families do not stay whole because life is easy. They stay whole because love keeps reaching across the cracks. In the end, that's what saved us. Not perfect understanding. Not flawless trust. Just love, reaching, trembling, learning, healing. And now, when I look at my husband beside me and my children finding their way back to peace, I feel grateful for every storm we weathered. Because storms don't only break things. Sometimes, they reveal what's strong enough to survive. And what survived was love.